Hey, I'm Lee Waller, and welcome to Motion Media Design with After Effects. Today we're going to take a look at how I created this piece that you could use in a heads-up display. So let's jump in and get started. First thing we want to do is create a new composition. So I'm going to go up here to Composition, New Composition, 1920 by 1080. Going to drop that to 24 frames per second. We'll go with 10 seconds on that duration and hit OK. We're going to be using shape layers on this, and we'll start with the Ellipse Tool. So if you don't have that Ellipse Tool selected, you can click right up here and hold that down and go to the Ellipse Tool. And an easy way to start an ellipse from that point is to just double click right there. And so there is our first ellipse. Now we're going to make some changes to this. First thing we want to do is come up here and we're going to change the fill type. We're going to change that to a radial gradient background right there. Click on that and hit OK. You can see that we have that radial gradient right there, and we're going to work with that in just a few minutes. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to get rid of that stroke. So let's go up here to the word stroke, click on that, open it up, and we'll select none. Hit OK on that. Now, down here in our timeline, you'll see that that ellipse has been added. It is on a shape layer right there, ellipse 1. And there is our path. We're going to change that path. Let's deconstrain this. So click off of that chain link right there so that these two are not constrained together, and we can type in exactly what we want. So let's go with 769 by 769. And if for some reason that gradient is not white to black like it is right here, we can drop down here into the gradient fill and then bring up the edit gradient right there. And I'll bring that in, take a look at it. And we want this first color stop to be white, and we want that last color stop to be black. Hit OK on that. And now you can see the bounding box that I have for there. I had the bounding box turned off, and to turn that on and off, you can use Control-Shift-H or Command-Shift-H on a Mac. So now you can see the controls for this ellipse and for the gradient there. So I'm going to grab this handle right here, and I'm going to drag this gradient on out. Just bring it out there just a little bit past. And at this point, we pretty much have our gradient. We are going to drop the opacity of this gradient down. So over here, again, in our timeline, under Shape Layer 1, Ellipse 1, Gradient Fill 1, we'll have the opacity there, and we can drop that down to 30%. So that's the beginning of the dial that we're creating. I'm going to go ahead over here and label this background. And I'm going to jump back over to the original and take a look at it. So you can see there's the background there, and we're going to have these dashes in here that we're going to need to create. So that'll be the next thing that we will tackle. Jump back over, and to create those dashes, we'll use another shape layer. So I'm going to go up here and make sure that nothing is selected down in your timeline. And I'm going to double click on that ellipse tool again, just like we had earlier, but this time we're going to make some other changes to it. With that layer selected, we'll go up to fill, and we will not need a fill on that. So we will click none right there, hit OK. And then on our stroke, we will need a solid. Click OK on that. And let's take a look at the color here. And the color for that is going to be white. So if you don't already have white selected, you can click in there, select white, hit OK. And then we're going to change the width of this stroke from whatever it is set at this point up to 14. So now let's jump down here into the ellipse properties down in the timeline, and we'll make a few setting changes here. First thing we want to do is go into the ellipse path for this. And we want to go to the size, and let's deconstrain those two numbers there, and let's set those at 700 by 700. So I'm just tabbing over there, and we'll jump into this ellipse, and we're going to actually need to go down into the stroke here, and right here you'll see dashes, and we're going to add a dash to that, and then we're actually going to click it one more time and add a gap to that. So under dashes, we'll have dash and then a gap. And we're going to adjust these two numbers. For the dash size, let's set that to 2. And for the gap size, let's set that to 20. And so there are our first set of dashes we're going to make one more change to this, and we will go to the transform properties for ellipse 1, and let's scale that up to 105%. And that sets it out on the edge of our dial there. So we have our first set of dashes going around, our smaller set of dashes. And I'm going to close up ellipse 1. Now you'll see that I'm still on shape layer 1. And let's go ahead and label that to dashes. So I'm going to select that, hit the enter key, and type in dashes. And hit enter one more time. And we're going to add another shape to this shape layer. To do that, let's just duplicate this ellipse 1. Select it and do a Control D or a Command D. And you'll see that we have ellipse 1 and we have ellipse 2 now. We can go into ellipse 2, open that up, and we're going to make some changes to it. We already have a number of things set up for us, but what we'll do is we're just going to, number 1, change the stroke size of that from 14 pixels up here to 50. And then we're going to go into the stroke again right here. And we're going to change our dashes. So we may have to open those up, but they are already in there. We're going to leave the dash at 2, and then we're going to change the gap to 108. And so now that sets our larger dashes at a limited number around the dial. All right, we will need to make one more adjustment because these aren't quite lining up. So we're going to go into ellipse 2. And let's go into the transform properties for ellipse 2. And then we'll jump down to scale. And where we set that at 105 for the first ellipse, we'll need to change that back to 100%. And now they're lining up just exactly the way we want them to. Let's close that up. And the next part that we want to work on is in the animation here will be the 2 bars that increase here. So let's work on those 2 power bars. We will begin again with another ellipse. So make sure that nothing is selected down here in your timeline. Let's go up to that ellipse tool, double click on it, and we've created another ellipse. So just like we've been doing, we're going to need to make some changes to this. On this ellipse, we'll go with the stroke as it is, white and 50 pixels on the width there. Then we'll come down here into the timeline, into that ellipse 1, and let's label that layer. So select that shape layer 1 right there and hit the enter key, and let's label this power bar lower. After doing that, let's jump into the ellipse path 1. And again, on that size, let's deconstrain those 2 properties, and let's set both of those at 700. Tab over by 700 and hit enter, and we're good there. We can close that up right there. Let's still make sure that we have ellipse 1 selected. We're going to need to add a modifier to this. Let's go over here to the add option. Click on that and let's add trim paths. You'll see now right there under ellipse path 1, we have trim paths 1. And we're going to open up that. And what it will do, and you can play with this real quick, is you can see that it's going to trim this path. For this bottom power bar here, we're going to create just a half circle down here. And to do that, we're going to work with the start property and set that first at 100%. And then we're going to go to the offset and let's drag that to a -90. And I know at this point you really can't see what we're doing, but once we get that, or you can type that in, -90. Once we have that offset at -90 and then we bring that back up, you can see there that we have that bottom bar there that we're going to create this animation with. So we can go ahead and leave part of that in there just so that we can see it. We're going to make one more adjustment to this lower power bar. Let's go into Transform, Ellipse 1, and let's bring that opacity down to 50%. That way those dashes can show through. All right, now let's work on creating that upper power bar. What we can do is duplicate the lower power bar. So select that layer and Control D or Command D. Let's relabel that. select it and hit the return key, and we can label that power bar upper. It'll be pretty easy to make the changes we need. Let's go into Contents, Ellipse 1, and it's the trim paths that we'll work with on this one. We can reset the start property to 0, and then we will use the end property to animate this. So you can see from 0% on the end property around to 50% on that, we will be able to animate it. So we'll just kind of dial that back, leave those two as they are. We do want to also change the color of this, so we can select that ellipse 1 right there under power bar upper, and then come up here to stroke, and we will dial in the hexadecimal, which will be 434343. That is a gray value there. Hit OK on that. And that way we just have some difference between those two power bars. All right, the next thing that we want to do is we want to create this lower half circle here. To do that, we're going to add another ellipse into this. Make sure that nothing's selected. We can double click on it. We do want this to have a fill, so let's click on the word fill up here and choose solid color. Hit OK. This does not need a stroke, so we can click on the word stroke right there and remove that. Click on none, hit OK. And of course, we'll go into now this shape layer here. Let's label it, select it, and hit the return key. And we'll label this bottom half circle. And let's go into the properties there for that ellipse path. Let's go ahead and set the transparency of this to 50%. So transform ellipse 1 underneath that bottom half circle. Select on opacity and let's dial that into 50%. We can close that up. And now we can go into ellipse path 1 and we're going to change the size of this. Deconstrain that property there. And we'll dial this in at 527 by 527. After that, we are going to add a modifier to this, and that is going to be trim path. So let's select ellipse 1. We'll come over here to add, and we'll go to trim paths. Let's open up that trim paths, and let's adjust the start property to 50%, and then we're going to offset this by a negative 90%. So we're done with that layer. The next thing we want to do is create an outline for the entire dial and then an outline for this upper part. To create the outline, of course, we're going to use the Ellipse tool again. So I've just jumped up in there, make sure that nothing is selected down here, jumped up in there and double clicked on the Ellipse tool. Again, that has created an ellipse, and we're going to change this. We'll need no fill. Hit OK on that. And then for stroke, we will need a solid color. We can hit OK on that. We can bring down the width of that to 4 pixels. And let's change that color to white. Hit OK on that. And of course, we're going to jump down in here to the ellipse 1 and go to the path there, deconstrain those two. And on this first one, let's change this. This will be the outer stroke here. Let's change that to 776 by 776. And that one is done. Easy enough on that. So we can close up that ellipse 1 and we can keep this layer selected, and we can duplicate this ellipse 1, Control D. Now we have ellipse 2. Let's open that up, and we will need to change the size of this, and we can constrain that back together and then type in 524. And that draws that in, decreases the size of it, puts it right there. Now you can see that that is going all the way around. We can leave it like that, or we can make this one change to it. And that change will be to just have it on the upper portion and not the bottom portion of it. To do that, we're going to add, again, this modifier trim path. So I'm going to make sure that I have Ellipse 2 selected. We'll go to Add and add in Trim Paths. And we'll open that up. And we're going to bring that start to around 25% and the end to 75%. And then we will adjust this 180 degrees and slide that back over on top. So there we have the top part of this. And what I want to do is I want to adjust the color of it. And I'm going to come into the stroke here, open that up. There's my color. I can click on the color picker. And the color that I want for that is going to be 43, 43, 43. So that it matches this bottom portion here. So we're done with that part of the design. We can close this up. Let's label this circular lines. And to jump back and take a look at it, we are missing our numbers. That'll take a couple minutes to get that done. And then we have our text in there. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll animate both of the power bars. I'm going to set up a couple of these numbers. And then after that, you can continue working and populating the rest of it. You can hit pause on the video and then come back to finish up. So to start this off, I'm going to start with 0 here. Get the text tool, type in 0, and going to come over here. I'm using Avenir Next. I'm going to change that to regular. And the font size that I want for the numbers will be 35 pixels. I'm going to zoom into my viewer. I'm going to hit Control plus or Command plus on the keyboard, and then I'm going to hold down the space bar and that little hand appears, and then I can click and move. I want to be able to grab this number here and drag it into place. And of course, I'm going to need to change the color of that. We'll make it white. Hit OK on that. And there's our first number. I can duplicate that, Control D, and double click on it. And I can type in 10. That'll be the next number that we want. And then using my shift and arrow keys, I can start placing this. You can hold down the shift key. It'll move it a little bit faster, or you can let go of the shift key and using the arrow keys and place that. So we have that number. Now I'm going to Control D again, double click on that and type in 20. And I'll start moving this into place. Again, holding down my shift keys, using my arrow keys, kind of getting that in place. If I need to fine tune it, just let go of the shift key and just kind of move that into place where it seems like it works well. I'm going to move over, I'm going to hold down the space bar, grab with the hand tool, move over, and just continue this process. I'll do this a couple more times. Control D, I'm going to double click on that one and type in 30. And then again, using the shift key and the arrow keys, I'm going to move this into place. And one more time, Control D. Double click on that one, type in 40, and start using my arrow keys to get over there. Kind of get this in place. And just going to continue that process out until I get done with 100 over here. Then we can duplicate those numbers and bring them down. All right, so I have finished out the numbers going from 0 over to 100. I did drop down the font size of the 100 to 30 pixels. Now what I'm going to do is just do a couple of these where I'm going to basically duplicate this number 10 and bring it down here to the bottom. So selected that here in the timeline, Control D. I have a second copy of it, and I can just start bouncing that down using the shift and arrow keys. Get that in place. Then I can grab the 20, Control D that, and then start bringing that down. We'll need to get my space bar here, get the hand tool, let go, and get that so I can see it. Bring this down and move that into place a little bit better. And we'll just move around a little bit more, zoom out, and Control D number 30, and start bringing that down into place, and just continue this process till you get the rest of them done. All right, so I have finished up adding in all of my numbers. The next thing that I want to do is add in the rest of the text. We'll do that real quick. So I'm going to grab the text tool, click in here and type in all caps engine. I have that, and I'm using Avenir Heavy on this one. Make sure that text is selected. Come over here to my character palette, go down here to heavy. And then also I'm going to need to increase the font size of that. That will be 109. And I can drag this over into place. And just to kind of speed things up, I can select that, duplicate it, and then bring it down. Double click on it and type in all caps power. The word engine, the color for it, I'm going to bring it down a little bit, not completely white, and we'll, the hexadecimal for that will be 84, 84, 84. Hit OK on that. And then for power, select the color for that, and it will be 0F, 0F, 0F. Get that set, and we have two more text pieces that we want to add in for engine 1 up here and then engine 2 down here. So what we'll do is, again, grab our text tool and do E period 1. I'm going to hit the return key on my keyboard for that, get my selection tool, bring it over. Now, of course, this is much larger than I want it to be, so I'm going to bring that back down to 35 pixels, and we're going to change that color back to the same color as this engine text right here. So I can grab my color picker there, the eyedropper there, select it, bring that up. And once we have that in place, we can duplicate that, Control D, and then just drop that down to the bottom. Definitely going to need to change the color on this to the same color as the word power right there. So make sure that that is selected. Go over here to the color picker and grab that eyedropper, go anywhere in that text and hit OK. And there we have it. So we're set up. So let's animate this thing real quick. So to animate this power bar, we're going to use the Trim Paths Start option here. And to do that, we'll need to start our first keyframe at the beginning of the composition. So make sure the timeline indicator is at the beginning. We'll click the stopwatch to set that first keyframe. Let's set that at 100% right there. And jump in maybe about 2 seconds in, and we'll bring that down, that 100% down to say about 54%. That gets the power bar over here. And then let's jump down in the timeline to about 7.5 seconds. And then we can add another keyframe by coming down here to the very left side of the program and hit the add or remove keyframe at current time so that we have that second keyframe there. What we're going to do is we're going to select these two keyframes. I'm just dragging, clicking and dragging over them. And if you don't have this palette open, the Wiggler, you can come up here to Window and drop down to Wiggler and click on that, and it will open up that palette. So what we're going to do is use the Wiggler to animate in between this some variation. To do that, again, make sure that the two keyframes are selected, and we can try this frequency of 5 per second at a magnitude of 1 and hit apply. What that does is it goes through and 5 times per second is going to adjust this value right here by a magnitude of 1. So now let's go back and take a look at what that has done. So you can see that that just gives us some variation on that animation. Then I want to drop in and go about 8.5 seconds in and then just bring this back to 100% like the engines have cut off. And let's see, take a look at our entire animation. So powers up, maintains for a few seconds, and then drops off. So we'll do that to the upper power bar also. So I'm going to close this up, go to my power bar upper and go into that trim paths. Now our values will be different. On this one, we're going to need to animate the end property there. And we'll need to bring that end property down to 0. And just like we did earlier at the beginning of our timeline, let's set that first keyframe. And then we can jump in. We can vary it a little bit so these aren't hitting at the same time. Maybe either a little before or a little after the 2-second mark. Bring that up and let's see, maybe around just whatever you want to do there, 46%, 47%, somewhere in there. And then again, we can vary that time up, maybe let it lag a little after the 7.5 mark and click the add keyframe button there. So we have our 2 keyframes right there. We can select those 2 keyframes and then come back over here. And if you want to adjust the magnitude on that, maybe a little bit, set that to 2 or the frequency. You can change that up, hit apply. And let's take a look at that now. We'll go back to the beginning of the timeline. So we'll let that play through, take a look at what we've got. And I do know that we're going to need to add another keyframe in here on that top power bar, but that's looking really good. We can drop that out, bring that down. Let's see, about 8.5 seconds, somewhere in there. Bring that back to 0. And so as like the engines have cut off, take a look at it. There they are, they power up. Hey, I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for watching. For more in-depth look at motion media design with After Effects, check out my other tutorials.